thinking about ways that we respond to this holiday, this Zman Simchatenu, and trying to think of the
Wait a
ways that
minute.
we create Cliff, mute yourself. The ways that we create virtual experiences out of a holiday that is anything but virtual, a holiday that has a lot of physicality in it. I was thinking about this old custom known as Ushpitzen. And Ushpitzen, you may know, was a custom whereby characters from our biblical past and our ancestry were welcomed into the sukkah. The sukkah is a holiday of welcoming. And something, a little narrative was spoken about them, and it was a teaching experience for parents to their children. It also connected to some mystical notions that were taught on this holiday. So I thought we could do an Ushpitzen, and the way we could do an Ushpitzen is not by inviting people from our biblical past, but rather inviting people who are part of our present. And in particular, we have 4 different couples and individuals who are part of our community, who have made exceptional contributions to the Jewish people. Over the years, there has been one aspect in my rabbinate that I've been truly sorry about, and it had to do with the following. We had 2 elderly members. One was Florence Melton, originally from Columbus, Ohio, and the other was Buddy Mayer from Chicago. And these were 2 women that were transformative in their time. They were remarkable individuals who made out of their lives works of heroism in different ways. So I used to have lunch with them once a month, and I used to speak about the fact that I want to do an evening with them where they sit up on the bima together with me, and we do a type of talk show because their lives were so fascinating. Well, unfortunately, it was one of those things, I thought was a good idea and I never got to. What I realize now is that the Zoom platform provides us as a community with the opportunity to meet with people who've made a difference. The other thing that I want to say is we've worked really hard to make out of this very large synagogue a sense of it being a small community where people do know each other and people do care for each other. But the truth is, with something close to 1,400 families on our extended rolls, it's really impossible to do that. So the people who come here every day, they know each other, and there's concentric circles around that. But there's so many people who are essential parts of this community that people don't know. So we will get to know them. What I find fascinating is that these people who you're going to be hearing from this week are people who are present. The Lippys are at Shul many more Shabbatot than they're not at Shul. And yet I know they come with their, sense of humility and a sense of that they are just one small part of a community. But in many ways, and I don't say this to embarrass the 2 of you, in many ways you are giants in the American Jewish community. Your contributions have been extraordinary. So before we get on to speaking about them, and I could do an evening's talk about the Lippys, and they wouldn't have to say a word, but I won't do that. However, by way of honesty, I will tell you that I've been friends with the Lippys for probably about 35 years. We've known each other. They were members of my first congregation in Warren, Ohio, where I got to know them and learn about them. So just quickly, a few things I will say about them by way of background. Bill was one of the founding members of the Young Leadership Cabinet of UJA in the 60s. And under the guidance of a great rabbi by the name of Herb Friedman, he and some of his friends created a young cabinet that transformed the UJA at that time and began to make it into that powerful organization that it became. He devoted his life to the UJA and to the Federation, in addition to the tennis centers, which we're going to hear about tonight. But there's one other thing about Bill that you should know, and that is that Bill is an ear surgeon. He's one of the people who developed cochlear implants, and he has brought hearing to people who would otherwise have lived lives of the deaf. He has performed extraordinary miracles as a surgeon, and he's developed the tools for that trade that have really helped surgeons. In addition to that work, though, he took it to Israel, and a few weeks every year for some 30 years, was it? He went to Israel, together with Sandra, who served as his nurse. And they operated on IDF pilots, and they trained another generation of ear surgeons. One of the first people that I met when I became a rabbi in Warren, Ohio, in this little town, was an Israeli Air Force pilot. In fact, he was the #1 test pilot in the IDF. And he was in this hospital in Warren, Ohio, getting ear surgery. I had not met Bill Lippy at that point. And so I go to the room of this guy, and I was just amazed that he was in, what was this Israeli Air Force pilot, this leading pilot, doing there? And then I learned that Bill at that point was bringing the pilots to Warren for surgery, but later on he did all that surgery there. So his work continued then with the creation of the Israel Tennis Centers, which now has another name, that is ITEC, the Israel Tennis and Educational Centers. Sandra Lippy was one of the first adult bat mitzvahs that I had the privilege of officiating at. They were both members of my congregation. I also did the bar mitzvah of their youngest son, Brian. And Sandra was involved in Federation and Women's Division and Lion of Judah. She was the person who made the connection between the Lions of Judah in the United States and the newly developed Lions of Judah program in Israel, and then became a real force in the Israel Tennis Centers herself, and chaired the Israel Tennis Centers for quite a while. Years ago, the Jerusalem Post did a story on Bill Lippy, and the title of the story was, and I have it in my files here, "The Ear in the Racket." And there's a memorable line in that newspaper article, and the memorable line was that Bill Lippy is such a good fundraiser that he could raise money for high blood pressure. And so that has been many of our experiences of Bill. So without saying much more, what I would like to do now is to turn to the two of you. I'll ask you some questions. If you feel there's something that you'd want to say that is that I'm not asking, I want you to feel free to do that. So let me begin with you, Bill, okay? Bill, would you tell everybody how it was that you came to the concept of the Israel Tennis Centers? And also let everybody know what happened with Israel Tennis Centers from its founding to what it has become. And I will let everybody here know that what it has become is a true force in Israeli society, and helping giving young people skills on all different levels. So Bill, how did it get started? How did you get into it? And let's hear a little bit about it.
Well, thanks, David. I'm going to make one little correction first. The operation that I did and I taught was a stapedectomy. It wasn't a cochlear implant. It was done for patients who had a disease called otosclerosis, a hardening of the little bones of the ear. And I developed a way of removing the fixed portion and replacing it with parts that moved. And this is what I did, and I did 18,000 of these, more than anybody in the world. And with my Israel practice, I was able to bring my European patients to Israel, and this was something that I wanted to do too. So it was not cochlear implants.
Okay, sorry.
I went with the young leadership to Israel for my first trip. It was 1968. And I met many of the doctors, or a few of the doctors who were doing ear surgery at that time. We were doing a more complicated operation, and they had read, I did a lot of writing, so they had read what I had written, and they wanted me to come back and help them. So I agreed to. So the next year, I took an operating team. There were 7 of us, and we went to 3 different hospitals, and I did a number of surgeries. At the end, they said to me, "We'd like you to come back every year." But that didn't make sense, because in Israel at that time, it's kind of fun. The main hospital which I worked was Tel Hashemer Hospital. It was a series of 42 Quonset huts. And our patients were in one Quonset hut. We would wheel them to the surgery, do the surgery, and wheel them back on a cart. There was no air conditioning. The rooms were hot. So of course, all the windows were open. Now at this meeting or anytime that I wanted to review a case, the audiograms were done on little pieces of paper, like tissue paper. We worked in our office with a piece of paper this size. We could do 8 audiograms, 4 on each side, and it was thick. So I could pick up a piece of paper and review 5 years of their history. So you try picking up pieces of tissue paper, and of course with no air conditioning, if I opened the door into the room, the tissue paper blew away. So I spent a good deal of my first visit to Israel picking up tissue paper off the floor. Then there's this system was that all patients, it was the European system, all patients were, came to the hospital on Sunday, whether they were scheduled for surgery Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Friday. By Friday, they were sick for just being in the hospital. So I wondered, you know, our wards are filled, yet we're not doing that many cases, you know, what's happening? Well, that's what was happening. So then I had a problem. I would see a patient, send them for an audiogram. So I saw them on Sunday. They said, we'll see them on Monday. They came back on Tuesday. I needed something else, Wednesday, Thursday. It got to be Friday. So it took me 6 days to do what I do in an hour and a half in my office. So if I just came back and continued that same thing, I couldn't help them. So I said, what I'll do is this. I will work for you in the hospitals half-time, and I will start a private practice half-time. And therefore, you're going to have to compete with me. I'm going to help you, but you're going to have to compete with me. The doctor who was the toughest on me was the head of the hospital in Haifa. And he was really a mean guy. And one day, I got a referral from him, not to Dr. Lippy, but to Professor Lippy. So here's a guy who treated me horribly and yet sends me a patient as Professor Lippy. I went to visit with a cousin of mine. He said, oh, he's a relative of yours. He's a cousin. He's another cousin. So when we were cousins, I got to be professor where he didn't even think of much of me as a doctor. So that's how I started. Then I taught 5 of the doctors. I brought them to Warren, Ohio. They lived with me. Principles of the surgery. After a few years, I realized that some of the doctors that I trained, 2 of them, and many of the people that I knew were leaving Israel. It was a tough country in which to live. So I wondered what I could do to improve the quality of life. Well, I knew I couldn't take on a whole country, maybe through kids. So I thought, how do you get to kids? Through sport. I did not play tennis at the time, but I went and looked at all the sports. So I thought, maybe tennis is the answer. Let's try it. So I found 5 other guys. We went to our bank in Warren, Ohio, borrowed $2 million. And we started out to build a tennis center in Ramat Sharon. Why Ramat Sharon? It was an upscale community. If we would have put it, the first one in Beersheba, they would have torn down the nets and played soccer. So we built the first one, and we built it without a building permit. We built our first 7 tennis centers without building permits. And we had no idea when we started out that we were going to build a lot of them. Come to the end of the story, there are now 14 tennis centers. They're all over the country. They're basically for children. The adults can play early in the morning or late at night, but otherwise it's children. We have graduated 500,000 children. We have 20,000 children a day. It's the largest social program in Israel. And we use tennis as a vehicle to improve their lives. Each kid that comes to us is convinced he can be a champion. Like Amos Mansdorf, he can, play Davis Cup for Israel. They can make $1 million a year. That's why they come, not because they want to learn etiquette or how to hold a knife and fork or anything else, but because that's why they come. Those are the things that we can teach them. So we have a variety of social programs. Maybe Sandra will mention some of them. There are just a tremendous number. I know people, David, and so do you, who have worked as hard as I have, or maybe harder, on Crohn's disease, on diabetes, on almost anything you can think of. I'm just lucky because the thing that I chose, and Sandra said that I'm the visionary. I wasn't a visionary. I started out to help build that one center, that's all. So I'm just lucky that the thing that I chose turned out to be what it is. May I stop there?
Sure. Let me go. Sandra, you want to talk a little bit about how then this project, this dream, became more than just teaching kids how to play tennis and teaching them etiquette? What are the other achievements of the centers? And speak a little bit about where the centers have been located and where they have been built.
Well, there are 14 centers, and all but, let's see, Haifa and Ramat Sharon are really the two that are in not impoverished communities. The rest of them are, and that was the intention, because those are the areas that would never get a chance to learn a game of tennis they could have for the rest of their lives, but more importantly, to come and feel safe, to come after school when both parents are working, and they could do their homework and have help, have a meal while they're there. And it became, if you asked, I think, just about any of the kids, they would say that the Israel Tennis and Education Center is my second home. And actually, half of my life, it was my first home. So it was so much more than the game of tennis, but we could use it because through a game, any sport, if you asked anybody here who plays any sport, you can really teach a lot of very good things through playing. How to win like a mensch, and how to lose, and how to get back up and start again, and how a lot of hard work pays off in life. And so it developed into many different levels of programs until now we have a social service department that takes care of any kind of child you can imagine with special needs, kiddos in wheelchairs, children even with autism.
We have a big wheelchair program.
The three programs that are the latest, sort of newer programs in the organization are, when we were talking about this a little bit earlier, obesity prevention. And we are working with physicians and HMOs and dietitians with our coaches. We also started an English language fluency program. And where does that come in? Really comes in all the periphery of Israel where we have children who don't really speak much English, not as much as in Tel Aviv or in Haifa or even in Jerusalem now. And so what happens, fast forward, they're looking for a job and they have to go to an interview. In fact, they have to get an interview. So we thought that beefing up their English skills would help them get that foot in the door. And it's really been an important program. And the third, yeah.
I'm sorry, finish.
There's just one more program that some of you may know about, and that's the newest program, the Girls Empowerment Program. This is for young teenage girls who were failing in school, and the schools came to us. And we need help. These girls all think they're gonna quit school at 16, get married, not have to go into the military, and clean houses the rest of their lives. And it has been one of the most earth-shattering programs we've ever done. 170 girls now, and we are really making a difference there.
So you've also done work in the whole area of shared society. And shared society both refers to religious and secular. It refers to Arabs and Jews, etc. Can you address some of that? Because I think that you've made a great contribution in that area with young people.
Almost every center has Arab kids, lots of them. We do not separate. We don't put Arabs on court 17 and Jews on court 12. They're all together. In many of the centers, each competitive team must have an Arab and a Jew. It's remarkable because we even start them in kindergarten. So the kindergarten kids come in and their parents come with them, and the mothers sit together, and pretty soon they're talking about their lipstick or their hair color or this or that. You know, that they really mingle. And the kids, you can't tell an Arab kid from a Jewish kid.
How about religious kids?
It's funny to see them with the tzitzis and the whole thing, but we have them, especially in Jerusalem.
Yes.
We have a number of religious kids. We're surprised. Now, they have certain rules. They can't play on Saturday, and they can't play on clay courts. That was a big thing with the rabbi, because if you play in a clay court, you leave a mark. And you couldn't leave a mark on a Saturday. So the kids and the adults must have their rackets already at the tennis center. They have to have prepaid. They can't carry money. They can't pay. And they must be on hard courts, not clay courts. But yes, we have the religious too.
And currently you have an exceptional kid from Beersheba, a Bedouin kid, is that right? He was here, I think.
Yeah. And his two sisters. Two sisters are better than he is. He is a Bedouin. He started at Beersheba. The family then moved to Tel Aviv, to Ramat Sharon, so they could be close to the main center where he could get, we have intensive training with the best kids in the country. Is it important to produce good players? Let me skip to that just a second. And it's very important. The kids come to tennis, really, I've said before, because they want to be like Amos Mansdorf or like one of the top players. When Israel 7 years ago in Davis Cup beat Russia in Israel, it was the biggest celebration since 1948. Can you imagine? So many people have a concept of a Jew with the payas and the hat and so forth and the beard. Now, we've got a kid who's won Wimbledon twice. To have winners, can you imagine how that improves, that motivates our kids and the effect it has on people from other countries, European countries? And we run tournaments all the time that the kids come from Europe, and it does a remarkable amount of good. So it's important to produce those champions, because the champions bring the kids. And the more kids you get, the more chance you have of making champions. So while we're doing all the things Sandra is talking about, all the social service programs, we're also trying very hard to make really good players.
I understand that there was a major event in December of this past year, thankfully before COVID, where a new tournament started, a new international tournament that was named for you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it was probably one of the biggest thrills of our life, and that was to be able to create a tournament for 12-year-old boys and girls who don't usually get too many big tournaments, international tournaments. And we had, how many countries? We had seven countries. And so it started out that we were going to have this tournament. It was a week long, and they got to see part of Israel on a tour in the middle of the tournament. So that turned into, well, why don't we bring the family? And so they had been talking about it for a long time, but but there's 21 of us. So, we did it, and it was a gift. It was a gift to ourselves, and it was a thrill of a lifetime. I think each of our children would say that as well.
And this will be an ongoing event, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
That's really wonderful.
It was canceled for this year. We hope to do it.
Well, they're not really canceling. Well, we're doing a different kind of tournament this year. We're going to do an internal tournament, a series of them.
Uh-huh.
So they fit well when they can. So because of the
So-
virus, who knows?
I want to get back a little bit later to Israel Tennis Centers and how it became ITEC, the Israel Tennis and Educational Centers. But before that, there's a couple other things that I want to share. One is that Bill says I'm not a visionary, I just do the work that's in front of me, but he does dream big, and then he puts his head to the work, and he has the capacity with Sandra, and with friends and people around him to make things happen. So there's a project that Bill did in, I guess it was the late 80s or early 90s.
91.
1991. It was the time when all of the steel mills were pretty much closed down in northeastern Ohio, and the big auto plants were not doing well at all, as all of us were buying Japanese cars. And so Bill and a friend of his in Warren, Ohio, had this like crazy little dream. They were going to start a movement to buy American cars. And what they did is they first went around locally to the employers in the area, encouraging them to give down payments for cars or X amount of dollars to the people who worked for them, who would buy cars which were made in Lordstown, Ohio. And all of a sudden, we started to see a lot of cars in the area that were no longer Toyotas and Hondas, but they were, I guess, J cars or whatever the Chevy car was at that time. And it began to be a project that grew, and it grew way beyond that region. In fact, it got national attention. I believe Bill was on national news and talk shows. There were articles in him about in national newspapers and magazines, etc. So tell us a little bit about that. And I know, Sandra, you were involved in it. I think Stephen and David were also involved in it. I know in a little way I was pushing the clergy in the town to get involved in it. Tell us about, tell us what was the name of the project, and tell us how it came to be and its impact. It had a statistical impact on the purchasing of American cars.
I was flying from Florida to Ohio, and I was reading the newspaper and had a picture of Bush 1
Senior.
senior in Japan trying to sell them 6,000 American cars. And then when I got home, I turned on television. There was a picture of Tokyo. I didn't see where they would put one more car. I mean, it was full. So I thought, why not sell more cars in the United States? So I thought about what do I call it? What we call it Jumpstart America. I made a couple of calls to friends, and it was to buy a car made in America, not just Lordstown, car made in America. And it went crazy. So we had thousands and thousands of employers. There were no cell phones in that day. There were no computers. So we did everything by fax. I mean, we sent fax to people we didn't even know. Would you do this? Would you be part of it? Well, it started, that airplane ride was in February. We ended it in July because there was an election. There was an election in September, and I knew we wouldn't get the attention. The American car share of the market increased substantially for the first time in 30 years. So it was a tremendous, tremendous success.
And it's a lesson to everybody about, with an idea and a will, you can make things happen that go way beyond Warren, Ohio. Yeah.
But David, as usual, sort of my idea, then I stepped aside. Stephen ran all the finances.
Right.
David ran the PR. He and Sandra went to Detroit, met with the heads of the three major companies, and they said, what can we do to help you? And we said, we don't want any help. The whole idea of this is that it's a grassroots thing, that it's Americans helping Americans. It has nothing to do with our association with the manufacturers. So it was a family thing, and they all did the work. They all did the work.
I think it's a lot. There's a real parallel to what we do here at B'nai Torah as a community. all of you are very much involved in trying to help create a lot of different projects here. And in the very beginning, I can tell you that my mother in her 80s got her girlfriends, and they would sit around this long table we put together and they came up with the idea to make red, white, and blue ribbons. And so here's all these senior citizens making hundreds of red, white, and blue ribbons. And then they would tie them to every telephone pole and every front of every business. I mean, it was a real wonderful feeling. It really was.
Yeah. So you're both obviously products of families that taught you a lot about either integrity, ingenuity, and certainly in the case of Sylvia, that's Bill's mom, tzedakah, and family, and the importance of family. I also, I'm privileged to say that the Lippy family is a family that I know for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've known 5 generations of your family. And I think that, Sandra, your involvement in tzedakah and different tzedakah projects comes from the inspiration, both that she gave you and certainly that Bill did also. So Sandra, tell us a little bit about your progress to the ITEC and what you've done there, that the things that you've done through Federation and the national and the international Jewish community to bring you to the place where you are now.
Well,
How did you get started? What were some of the things that you were involved in?
well, I was a career woman when Bill and I first married. And so I was really not involved in anything at that early stage. And, but Sylvia took me to Hadassah meetings. That was the very first thing. And she made me a life member. I remember it as if it were yesterday. And so then I decided, well, Bill asked me if I would consider retiring for a while. So I thought, okay, for a while. And that was when the Jewish Federation grabbed me. It was a force like a vacuum cleaner. And I mean, it was like a whirlwind. And the first time they took me on a bus trip to Cleveland, which was an hour, and it was one of these events, we picked up a military Israeli on the way. It was all orchestrated. Well, that was it for me. And so that took me on a whole path up. So I was campaign chairman. I chaired the Let My People Go from the Soviet Union. We marched in Washington. I was part of the Ethiopian project. And then I had the privilege of being invited to be on the National Women's UJA board, which really was a privilege. And you touched on the Israel liaison to the Line of Judas from North America. I did that. And I also am proud that I was able to help and that I was the first chairman nationally of the endowment program to endow your Line of Judah. Mm-hmm. So all those years, I sat in the back of the room, in the boardroom of ITEC, Israel Tennis and Education Centers. I was just a wife there until I made the bad mistake of raising my hand one day at a meeting and suggesting that they might want to consider having a strategic plan. So that was the beginning of that. I was, of course, don't do that, anybody, because then you become the chairman of that strategic plan, right? So that was that, and then I was the national chair, and then I had another big privilege, and that was to be asked to be the international chair. And that was a very serious position, and I was, and still am, the only woman to hold that position. So hopefully there'll be another one soon. That's my
Yeah,
story.
tell us a little bit about what's been happening recently with the lockdowns in Israel and the dependence of all the kids on the Israel Tennis Educational Centers. What have they been doing, and how has the tennis centers been responding to these lockdowns?
Well, I'll tell you, it's been a very interesting experience. From a crisis on what are we going to do here, they turned it into an opportunity, and it's been an amazing birth. So what they did was, first of all the managers said, we want to stay and we'll take a 30% cut in our salary. The CEO took a 40% cut in his salary. We had to terminate a lot of people in Israel, hundreds, or furlough, I guess you would call it, for an unknown period of time, which is very tough. And we have all these kids who are depending on us, who are now at home because I'm talking about March now, the first COVID shutdown. So we became iTech Zoom education. And the managers and the administrator and some of the coaches, without being paid, they worked and put together a whole curriculum. They were on with those kids every single day, between nutrition, physical fitness, tennis exercises they could do at home. And we realized there was a big stop point where we realized that a lot of the kids didn't have computers. You know, we talked earlier about being in these small communities. So we decided we had to have an emergency campaign, and we did, and we sent 400 iPads to these kids. And then we realized that a lot of families were not going to be able to have a Passover dinner, a proper Passover dinner. So we did that also, and we gave 4,000 people a real Passover experience there. So, and it wasn't just that we gave, the managers delivered it to these families. And so they got a lot out of that. It was really quite something. And now comes the second one though, but we can get to that later.
I know I tend not to be a name dropper, but I do know, Bill, that and Sandra, that you had a pretty close relationship with Yitzhak Rabin and with Leah, probably growing out of a mutual respect that you had for each other, both in terms of the military, your own Air Force background and what you did for the pilots there, as well as he was notoriously known for his love of tennis too. So tell us a little bit about that relationship.
Yeah, our friendship started because of tennis. Leah and Yitzhak used to play every Saturday, and whenever we were there, which was 6 weeks a year, we played doubles. I was partnered with Leah and Sandra with Yitzhak, and they were fierce competitors, fierce competitors. And Leah became the patroness of the center. I can't tell you of the first center, of all the centers, I can't tell you how hard she worked, how she loved the program. In fact, we have the Yitzhak and Leah Rabin Fellowship Society, and people have given major gifts, and we have a huge board for that. Well, one of the problems we've always had in the tennis is we'll start a kid at age 6, and now he's 18, and it looks like he has promise internationally, but he has to go to the service. And we had 5 scholarships, or 5 deferments. Mm-hmm. So we could have 5 kids at any one time who took basic training, and then they were stationed close to where they could continue to work on their tennis. But if we had 4 of them in 1 year who were really outstanding, but we already had 3 in the program, we could only take 2 of those. So it wasn't very much. On the other hand, soccer had 67 deferments. There was even a deferment for the javelin. So our group figured out that I should go to Yitzhak, who was then the minister of
Defense.
the defense minister, and get some more exemptions. So we played tennis, and I particularly threw the game a little bit so that he was a good player. So Yitzhak won. So I knew he was in a good mood, and so we had a cup of coffee together afterwards. So we were sitting like we're sitting now face to face, and I said, Yitzhak, you're killing tennis in Israel. I said, you know, we just need more deferments. We just can't make great players with this, what we're doing now. And he said, Bill, I have 3 problems. What are they? Yitzhak, he said, number 1, when it comes draft time each year, every commander looks for the kids from the tennis centers. They're in good shape. They're confident. They're focused. They all want the tennis players. Number 2, if I were to reduce the soccer exemptions from 67 to 66, tomorrow I would lose my job as
Minister of Defense.
Minister of Defense. Mm-hmm. And number 3, and perhaps most important, where you sit now 2 weeks ago sat Isaac Stern. And you know what he said to me? He said, Yitzhak, you're killing the violin in Israel. So we never got more exemptions. That's one of my big failures in life.
What is some of the names of some of the champions over the years that people here might recognize?
Well, Andy Rahm won Wimbledon
And the
Australian, and it doubles the French.
Anna Smashnova.
Anna Smashnova was 14 in the world. Shahar Peer was 17 in the world.
Amos
Mansdorf was 18 or 19. Shlomo Glickstein was, lost that big match to I'll think in a minute, U.S. Open. So we've had some good players.
Who's the former champ, the female, who's now the director in Jaffa, at the Jaffa Center?
Oh, you're talking about our manager.
Yeah, what's her name?
Rakefet Binyamini.
Yeah.
Yeah, she not only got very high rankings, but she, along with, our count is a little rusty because we didn't keep very good records during the early days, but she's one of over 400 graduates who, because of the Israel Tennis Education Centers, they got enough skills that they got full college room and board and classes in the U.S. They got the full ride. So she's one of those.
David, we've had full scholarships at UCLA, Duke, Michigan, Brown, University of Miami, Tulane, Washington, Wake Forest, Maryland, Brown, Cornell, University of Washington. I mean, full scholarships for these kids.
Yeah.
Our CEO got a full scholarship to the University of Washington, then a scholarship to Cornell in business, then worked in New York for a number of years, came back and became the CEO of the tennis centers. Gil Kowalski got a full scholarship to the University of Miami, where he never lost a match. Then went back to Haifa to the Technion, got his master's, his PhD in microbiology, and is the #2 man today in General Electric in Israel. And
he's on our executive board for the tennis.
And as you ask him about the tennis, he talks about the number of kids that he had that he for years, he still went once a day to the tennis centers.
He still does.
And what's his main interest? The kids at risk.
Wow.
The kids who would smoke or the kids who would drop out and so forth and so forth. So his interest is in particular champions, it's the kids at risk. So some of their careers have just been fantastic, fantastic.
What do you, have you guys slowed down at all? What's your vision for your future in terms of where you are involved and what you're doing? I know that I was at your 90th birthday party a few years ago, so I know that.
Yeah, right. Well, I am very grateful that I had the foresight to pick my replacement as Global Resource Development Chair. That was my last job. And put a young gal on the board. And it was just the right timing. She's smart, she's involved in federation, she knows how to do it. And she's grown now to, she took my job as resource development, and now she became the national president just a few months ago. And she's from Youngstown, Ohio. Amy,
Yeah.
Hendricks, yes. So that to me was great. We still fundraise and do whatever they ask us to do. You know, it's time that we step back a little bit. So we're sort of there, go-to whenever.
I'm glad that a number of years ago, Magda Fishman, who grew up close to the tennis center in Yafo, didn't find it. Otherwise, she probably would have been a tennis.
No. I took classes there.
Oh,
I
you
took
did?
classes there.
Oh,
But I had to choose between that and piano, and guess who won?
well, we're better off for it. Probably the tennis center is too.
Yeah, the tennis center is better off without me, yeah.
So listen, I will wrap up by saying that you two have been an inspiration, and certainly in my life, as you know, but in the lives of so many people. Your contribution to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel is remarkable, without it becoming a politicized position, but something that was really for the benefit of children and communities and Israeli society, something that really has made a difference. I've always been honored to be your rabbi. I'm so pleased that you're a part of us here at B'nai Torah, and I look forward to seeing you in person. Before we cut out, I was just wondering if anybody has any comments or any questions that you would. Yeah, Dale, unmute, please. Unmute.
When we went to Israel with you, Rabbi, and we went to Jaffa, and at the center, it left such an impression on me that I carry all the time, because we taught children who were at risk. And I saw the kids, how enthused they were, and what you did with those kids, and it left a tremendous impression on me. And I just want to say thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad you were there.
You know, on that trip, I had to push, the travel people and everybody to make a stop at the tennis center. Everyone was saying, why do you want to stop at a tennis center? You can go to Delray. We don't need to do that in Israel.
Oh, it was wonderful.
But it was truly an inspirational piece of that trip, and will be memorable for everybody who did it. Yeah.
Rabbi?
Yes. Cliff?
Yeah. Bill and Sandy, I've known you for a long time. And in the early 90s, you convinced me, I had my arm in a sling for 2 days, but that was okay, to go on the trip to Israel and to Egypt. And my other arm was kind of loose, so I made a donation for one of the tennis courts. And in 1999, I took my whole family to Israel, and we were privileged, all of us who played a little tennis, to play on one of the courts of the Israel tennis. So I owe a little bit of thank you to you, and I did recover.
Oh, good.
Thank you so much for what you do.
You're a quick healer. Yeah.
Rabbi?
Yes, Steve.
Dad, could you talk about how you got quitting smoking in the tennis centers?
one of our original found, well, first, a couple little things. Rabbi Steinhardt is also on the board of the tennis centers. So he knows a lot about every charity, but that's why he knows so much about ours. And we so much appreciate him. Stephen, the question again?
Smoking.
Oh, smoking.
Okay. Yeah.
One of our original founders was a guy named Joe Shane from California. At the time, I met him at the
At the parade.
1973, at the parade anniversary of 25th anniversary of the founding of Israel. I happened to sit next to him, and he was interested in building some courts on the kibbutzim. And he was one of the 5 others that I convinced that came into our group and started the tennis center. He's this remarkable guy. And he was a principled guy. He was absolutely anti-smoking. That was one of his big things. So we opened our first tennis center. We built a stadium that sat 5,000, 6,000 people, 27 courts. And Joe insisted that we put up signs outside the tennis center, and we had a big tournament there, no smoking. Well, our Israeli counterparts were against it because they said, wait a minute, the guy's in row 27 and he starts to smoke. You're going to run up there and tell him he can't smoke, he'll kill you. But Joe persisted, and so in every center we built, there's no smoking, and on our main stadium, there's no smoking. What happened? Someone did light up, and the kids, 2 or 3 kids saw it, and they ran up and said, Mister, please don't smoke, it's bad for the children. And so for all these years, it's been 44 years, there hasn't been a cigarette lighted at the tennis centers. So that's something else. That might be the biggest thing we did for Israel.
That might be something to say if you did it in America, but to say it in Israel, it takes on biblical proportion. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the conversations that we didn't get to tonight, but I hope to get to with Betty Kane tomorrow, who I see is secretly watching here, is the question of the Israel that you guys met, the Israel that you guys started to visit in the 60s is not the Israel that we see today. And just as all things change, Israel's gone through tremendous changes. And so I'd like to reflect on that. Betty, I'm giving you some warning tomorrow when we speak with Betty. So tomorrow evening's program will be also at 7 o'clock with Betty Kane. And then Wednesday, we're going to be meeting a relatively new member of the congregation, Dana Adler. And Dana's got a remarkable CV already, and she's younger. And then on Thursday, we're going to meet with the Galatins, whose name is pretty familiar in this community. But what they have done for the underprivileged and the underserved in Israel is just remarkable. So each one of these members and these units, these couples, really represent something that gives us a lot of pride and makes us realize what a special people we belong to and what a special congregation we are because of people like all of you and because of you, Bill and Sandra. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. This is Becky.
Betty. Hi, Betty.
Hi, Betty.
Lisa. I am very excited to join you tomorrow, and I want to congratulate the Lippys. I have 3 sisters, and Sandra is the 4th. So we, Herb and I have been listening and enjoying every story, and are very, very impressed. We've known what you've done for a very long time, but we just love to hear those stories. And I hope to be on tomorrow.
We'll be watching, Betty.
God willing, Betty.
Chag Sameach. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Lippys. Can I also mention, I want to thank the Howard and Marshall Liebman, who sponsored virtual programming today in honor of his mom. And we'll be here tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. So look forward to seeing all of you.
David.
Hi, Leinhartz.
Hi, Julian. Hi, Denise.
Yeah, Bill?
Were you going to wind up saying something?
I thought I
Rabbi?
did. I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to thank you for your time. And I
Okay.
think it's been really wonderful for everybody. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Bye.
you.
God
Thank you.
bless. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you
Oh,
all.
yeah, I have one more thing I could say.
Bye-bye.
You
Go
know,
ahead,
like
Rabbi.
as a rabbi, there are people who are always giving you advice, giving a rabbi advice, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, how you look, how you shouldn't look, etc. One of the best pieces of advice I ever received in the rabbinate was from Bill's mother, Sylvia. And she said to me the following. She said, Rabbi, I just want you to know you'll never be sorry for what you don't say.
Yeah. Sylvia had lots of those sayings.
Yeah. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right.
Thank you, Bill and
Night.
Sandra.
Thank you
Night.
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Thanks,
Good
Rabbi.
night, Bill and Sam.
Good night,
See
Bill
you
and
tomorrow,
Sandra.
Betty.
Good night.
Good night.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Great.
Good night.
Hey, Ellen, I've got a good movie to recommend.
Good. Where are you? I can't find you on my screen. There you are.
The movie is called, it's fantastic, actually. It's called Bella and Oma.
Sebastian, oh, Bill.